discovered further west from Spain and Portugal. So they had discovered islands further out into the ocean. So they thought, well, maybe not much further, and we can get to China, to Asia. So let's try. And Christopher Columbus, he's crazy. He's willing to go. Let's let him go. Let's try. So the Spanish gave him money, the Spanish king and queen, so he could buy supplies and hire ship crew, people to work for him, and then they would sail to Asia. Next slide. Columbus sails. So Columbus, with 3 Spanish ships, set sail in August of 1492. And it took them about 2.5 months. After 2.5 months, they arrived at an island off the coast of China. However, strangely, he calls the native people Indians. We think maybe he called them Indians because they had darker skin. Okay? They already knew that Chinese people, Asian people had lighter color skin, or at least East Asian people, right? And usually darker skinned people were from India, right, or Pakistan, those kind of southern Asian countries. So they called them people Indians because they thought, well, maybe we're somewhere in Asia, India, perhaps. And he called these islands the West Indies. The West Indies. However, we know today that this was not China, and it was not India. Next slide. Surprise, it was a whole new world, as they call it. Right? This was not China, it was not India. In fact, these were 2 large, unknown continents. And they would later be known as America in 1507, or the Americas. So if you remember from our meeting last week, I mentioned about surprises. Surprise is an important theme in history, right? Where people are just living their life. People expect one thing, and then something else happens, right? And so here we see an example of this big surprise in history. The Europeans thought they were going to reach Asia. Instead, surprise, there's 2 huge new continents they had not known about before. All right, next slide. Surprise, barrier continents. Something that many American people, and just people in general today, don't know, is that the Europeans were not happy about these new continents that they found. Remember, their goal was to go to Asia. They wanted to go to Asia to get rich, right? To find new products that they could sell back in Europe, right? That's what the Spanish wanted. But now, they've come to this whole new place, right? They don't know what's there. And the people that they find are we would say, like they live a much more simple life compared with the Chinese and even the Koreans and other people at this time, right? Korean society in the 1400s is pretty developed, right? And same as China and India as well. There's goods and things they can buy and sell. But when they find the people here, they're very basic people, right? If we think of the Native Americans, the Indians that we've already seen and learned about, their lifestyles is much simpler, generally, okay? Generally. So the Europeans were not happy about this, okay? They referred to these continents as barrier continents. For them, it was like a big wall in their way. They don't want to be here. They want to get to Asia, okay? And so the Spanish would even try to find ways around the Americas. So you can see this map I have on the slide, this blue globe of the Earth. Starting from Spain, the Spanish hired Ferdinand Magellan to sail around South America. So you can see his path here. He sailed south around South America and across the Pacific Ocean and eventually reached Asia. But the trip was too long and too expensive.
Yep.
Because of course, not only do they have to sail around and through the Atlantic,
Yep.
but they have to cross the Pacific. And we know the Pacific Ocean is huge. It's a very big ocean. Okay? So the Spanish realized it's possible, but it's too hard. It takes too long, it's too expensive. So it's not worth it. Okay? So the Spanish and other governments give up. Next slide. They give up on trying to find this way across the world to get to China and to Asia. And actually, at this time, Christopher Columbus was seen as a failure, right? He didn't get to Asia. He found these new continents, right? These continents that are useless, right? Nobody wants these places. However, there are some private explorers, like Cortez and Pizarro, these Spanish explorers. They travel to the Americas and they discover actual rich civilizations like the Aztec and the Inca Native American peoples. However, when these explorers go and meet these Indian peoples, they were not peaceful situations. The Spanish, when they went to these American places, these explorers, they wanted gold, they wanted riches. And so when they encountered the native peoples, the Spanish had advanced weapons, right? They had swords, they had gunpowder, they had guns and cannons. The Indians did not. And so when the Spanish came there, they demanded from the Indians, give us gold, right? Give us gold or we will kill you. And the Indians had some gold, but not a lot, okay? And so often the Spanish would kill them because they didn't have what they wanted.
Spanish killed Native American?
Yes. Okay, so next slide. I would show you a bit of film here of this, but I'll skip it just for time.
Okay.
Next slide. Death follows the Europeans. So you might have heard of these civilizations, the Aztec and the Inca. If you don't know, I'm sure you know of them. You might just know a different name in Korean. But these were huge civilizations. They were actually quite advanced. They analyzed the stars. They could predict the solar eclipse of the moon. They had calendars. They had large architectural places, right? If you go to Mexico today, you can still see some of their huge buildings that they built. They look like big pyramids, okay? So they didn't have advanced weapons, right? They didn't have guns. They didn't have horses. But like I told you, the horses didn't exist in North America, okay? So they didn't have some things, but they were still advanced. But they were destroyed by the Spanish. Okay, the Aztec and Inca empires, they were wiped out by the Spanish. The Spanish killed a lot of them. Okay? So death follows the Europeans when they get to the New World. And also, Hispaniola, that is the island where Christopher Columbus landed. I gave you some statistics here. In 1496, when Columbus landed on the island, of the native people, there were over 1 million of them living on this island. Okay, so a lot of natives are living on the island. But only 50 years later, in the middle 1500s, almost all of them are dead. only 200 are left alive. So why does this happen? Of course, there's lots of murder happening here. In order to control the Indian people, the natives, the Spanish would kill many of them, right? To kind of scare them, to make them follow the Spanish. Also, the Spanish made many of them into slaves. When the Spanish couldn't find gold, they still want to make money somehow. And so one way was to make these Indian people into slaves. And they could sell them in Europe, to have Indian slaves in Europe, or they could use them as a slave worker in the colony. Okay, so they could kind of grow crops or dig in the earth and do other things. But still, for the Spanish to kill and enslave 1 million people, it's almost impossible. It's too many. So most of these deaths, we think, were caused by another, or for another reason, which I talk about in the next presentation. All right, and so that's the lecture summary now. That's the end of this quick presentation, talking about how and why did the Europeans go to the New World. So first I started talking about the European Crusades, right? The Crusades provided motivation for the Europeans. The Europeans gained experience in having big expeditions, and they also heard about the Orient. They heard about Asia from the Muslims, and they heard that they could get a lot of money and gold from Asia. And so that gave them motivation. They want to try to find ways to get there. As we saw, the Italians found the land route. The Portuguese found the southern water route to go to Asia. And so the Spanish needed to try the new pathway, going around the planet. But instead of arriving at Asia, they found the New World, as they called it, the Americas. And although we talked about this last time, Columbus's voyage was not the first discovery of the New World. I had mentioned before, we know that the Vikings first came.
Yes.
Also, I haven't mentioned Africans came, and even the Indians first came, right? But the reason why Columbus's voyage was important was that it was the first long-lasting contact between Europe and even Asia and the Americas, right? So that's why it was key. Okay, so I went through the lecture pretty quickly. Do you have some questions?
Spanish found South America and killed them.
Yes, some of the Indian peoples. So I wish I could show you on the slides. Maybe you can look it up here. I don't know the names of the people. Let's see. I'm going to search neighbor if I can find it. Have you heard this term Inca or Aztec?
Yes.
Okay, then you know them. Yeah, those are the people that Columbus didn't find them.
Yes.
He found other Indian peoples.
Yes.
But then later more explorers come, and they found the Inca and the Aztec, right? And if you know anything about the history, they were big civilizations,
Yes.
right? Hundreds or even thousands of people living together. They built big pyramids and large structures, right?
Yes.
But they very